Okay, good to see everybody. Nice full Zendo this morning, this fine morning. Last time I shared a Dharma talk was online, and it was about this koan in the book Hidden Lamp, entitled Anoja Seeks the Self. And I like that was kind of a part one of that Dharma talk. So this is part two, maybe the closing part of that. But the gist of it, of the koan is, so it's a relate. There's another king. So in the Buddha's time, the Buddha was slated to be a king. He forgoes his kingship, kind of unprecedented, especially in that time. And yet he had all of these connections with kings because they all knew him. They all knew who he was supposed to be. You ever meet people? You never have conversations with people who know who you're supposed to be? And how much that changes. We feel like trapped. You ever feel trapped in somebody else's idea of who you're supposed to be? Right? So the Buddha, that's what made him the Buddha. One of the things that made him the Buddha is I'm not going to be trapped in somebody else's idea who I'm supposed to be. And so, and that's a revolutionary idea. 2,500 years ago, even today, it's a gateway to great freedom. And it's not that it's a one-time only thing that we do, because people continue to place us into definitions of who they think we're supposed to be. People do that all the time to us. So we're finding ourselves in this dilemma. And certainly the Buddha must have experienced that too throughout his life. And he has these relationships with several kings and queens. And so this koan case is about Queen Anoja. And her husband decides to follow what the Buddha did and forego his own kingship and relinquish it. And he handed all the power in his kingdom over to his wife, the queen. Well, she didn't want all that power, apparently. And she goes to seek the Buddha for guidance. And he asks her, which do you seek more? Do you want the king, or do you want to know the true nature of the self? And she says, without batting an eyelash, the true nature of the self. That's the way the story goes. And last time we had some discussion about, what are the implications of that particular story for us? What are some of the positive things that could come out of it? What are some of the negative things that may not be so helpful for us? Keeping in mind that the marriage was probably quite more complicated, but complicated like any marriage. There's on one level, it was probably an arrangement. It wasn't based 2,500 years ago on love in the sense that we think of that today. And it was political. It was a political, and it involved the wielding of power, and what decisions they made had far-reaching implications for the people that they were in charge of in their kingdom. So we had some discussion about this. What I want to do is share my own kind of concluding thoughts about this particular koan, and then look at another relationship with another king that the Buddha has, and it talks about love as well. So the question the Buddha poses to Queen Anoja: would you rather seek the king or the nature of the self? That's the question, at least how it's translated here. Would you rather seek the king or the nature of the self? And he really kind of sets this up somewhat dualistically. It's one or the other. I see so this is the interesting thing about Zen that my teacher would always bring up is, can we hold both? Can we hold both? Does it have to be one or the other? Does it have to be the king or the nature of the self? It's just a question I put out there. Do we have to either seek spiritual awakening or get involved in family life? That's one of the ways this question was. So in the Buddha's time, it was very definitely one or the other. And today, in many Buddhist circles, that's the way it's posed. It's one or the other. I mean, you could also do this practice as a lay person, but there's something elevated about doing it as a home leaver. As Buddhism comes into United States and other non-Asian spaces, there's been some questioning about that. And one of the things I want to bring forward here is if you were to be a home leaver, there is a really profound kind of loneliness to that, a loneliness. And we could probably compare that loneliness to the palpable loneliness that exists in our culture today, whether or not you want to be a priest, or whether this question of whether you're a priest or not is maybe irrelevant when it comes to loneliness, because there's this really profound level of loneliness in our society today that's we often try to cover with multitudes of distraction, and we have so many distractions at our hand. Literally, we have so many distractions at our hand. And so, while we were sitting here this morning for Zazen, I was just so appreciative of everybody in sync, deciding to not have their phones on, to not be going like this. Right? This movement here has become so habitual. And 20 years ago, most people didn't have one of these where they did this. And still a lot of people, if you think about planetary-wise, a lot of people don't communicate this way. And there's something very much lost in our technology when we gain something technologically, technological advancement, we lose something simultaneously. But what is it that we lose? And we don't often think about that. But we have profound abilities to communicate that are not relying on a digital extension. We have profound abilities to communicate. That's what the transmission of the Buddha is. The Buddha is communicating enlightenment to each of us at every single moment of our existence. We don't pick up on it through the technology. We pick up on it through direct experience. And we do that here through Zazen, through meditation. We pick up on that transmission of awakening. And it's not just spiritual that I'm talking about in terms of deep level of communication. It's also, what we lose is also our ability just to communicate with others on a daily basis. I'm thinking of several years ago, I came across some writings of Mark Twain. We all have heard of Mark Twain. He's a celebrity writer of, a century or two ago. and I came across these writings of his called Mental Telegraphy. And he talks about how he would find himself writing a letter, like a telegraph, I guess, in those days, to somebody. And before the letter would reach the person it was intended for, he would get a message back from them that would answer his question, and vice versa. And he found this happening numerous times, that when he would write something, they would get the message in the process of him writing it out. When I was when I was doing my chaplaincy, clinical pastoral education, I was in York, Pennsylvania for a year, and I was dating Jisho, my wife at the time, and she was in Japan doing an ongo for 3 months. So I talk about profound loneliness I was feeling. And so I would write her a letter and then send it in the mail. And before she got a similar thing, she would write back. And then I realized everything I wrote was already passed. We had already gone another step. It was excruciatingly painful because, we're used to the immediacy of communication. That's the technology piece that we love so much. You can send a message and get an immediate response. There's something to that. I don't want to say that that's wrong or bad, but we're losing sight of something here in the process, and that is that we all have this innate ability to communicate with others that doesn't involve a telephone, let alone an iPhone. When I say telephone, I mean a landline telephone. It doesn't involve a telephone or even writing a snail mail letter. We have this innate ability to communicate. And one of the ways that's done more formally is through prayer. When you pray for somebody, you bring that person to mind, and you send your thoughts there to that person. And when you do it with a certain level of intensity and intention, they will get your message. Maybe they don't get it on a conscious level immediately, but they'll get it. You should think about it. And I encourage people, I'm saying this to remind me that, because I use the iPhone all the time too. But there's something being lost here that we need to recognize, that we don't want to, I don't think we want to completely lose. My teacher was sharing a story of there was a book that she read about I want to say some kind of a tribe in the southern part of Africa, and a man who was half European and half of that particular tribe. He was going to visit with them and went on a hunt with them, and they didn't have any kind of communication at all with the tribe on the hunt. So they caught their game, and they were miles and miles away. And the man who had come to visit with them was with them on the hunt. He was trying to learn about his culture, etc. And he says, how are the people back at the village going to know to start the fire to get this? If we don't have a fire ready, this meat's not going to, how are we going to communicate this to them? And the guy who was one of the people that was there, and they know. And sure enough, when they came into the village, they had the fire already. They knew it. And there's something intuitive. People, and I remember my world religions teacher, John Grimm, saying something similar that the Hawaiians do, or maybe did, probably still do on some level in navigation. They have very sophisticated ways of understanding the currents and navigating the islands, where they go into their boats, deep into the belly of the boat, and the person who's navigating can feel the vibrations and knows the direction to go to the island that they're trying to go to. All right, so this is another kind of intuition using, It's more than just intuition. There's a science there involved, right? There may be there's training involved. There's somebody develop this skill that's not dependent on a screen. And again, this is not to be dismissive of screens and the high level of technology, because that has done so many wonders for us too. But at the expense of a kind of losing touch of that sense of connectedness that we all innately have. And when it comes to our spiritual practice, in the Zen tradition, there's a direct transmission between us and the Buddha happening in each moment. And if we train ourselves to pick it up, we will pick it up. It doesn't happen through, reading a book is fine, and it could happen that way. It could happen through looking at a sutra. It could happen through chanting, like we do. It could also happen through meditative practices. So, anyways, so there's this piece I feel around loneliness that needs to be addressed here on some level when we think about this practice. So there's another king. So I want to switch to a different story. This is in Old Path, White Clouds by Thich Nhat Hanh, and he's kind of written a fairly poetic version of some of the stories of the Buddha. And this is of King Pasenadi, and he asks him, "Teacher Gautama." Gautama is one of the names. That's the name of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. There are people who say you advise people not to love. You advise people not to love. That would be an impression I would pick up from this story of Anoja. Do you seek the king, or do you seek the nature of the self? That might be one interpretation of that. Okay, then it's better. Maybe we could potentially read that story as maybe it's better not to even get involved in a relationship at all and seek the nature of the self. That's one possible way of thinking about this. And so here it shows up. You advise? He's basically asking, is that true? Do you advise people not to love? Right? It seems so primal. It's another thing that's so primal. We desire to care. We desire to care. There's something in us that wants to care. People here, a bunch of folks came this morning to care for the Zen Center. We're out there, we're cleaned up the Zendo, outside and inside doing various things. We desire to care for spaces. We desire to care for each other. I desire that. So help me to understand, right? This is King Pasenadi. Help me to understand, is that really it, right? They say, you have said that the more a person loves, the more he will suffer and despair. Wow, more. So we can read some of the Buddha's teachings in that regard too, where he talks about not having desire, not possessing desire, and that desire is the foundation of suffering. There is that. And so King Pasenadi is clarifying this. Is this what you teach? I can see some truth in that statement, but I am unable to find peace with it. Without love, life would seem empty of meaning. Right? Without love, life would seem empty of meaning. Please help me resolve this. So this is his quandary, right? And I think this is so relevant for us too, in trying to discern what is this Buddhist Dharma? How do we navigate this in our life? Is it just total dispassion? Right? The Buddha looked at the king warmly. Your Majesty, your question is a very good one, and many people can benefit from it. All right, so we know the Buddha's loving these questions. That's another thing to keep in mind. Questions, if we don't understand something about the Dharma, it's so helpful to ask questions. You don't have to take what I say as truth, and if you disagree with it, all right, I'm out of here. You can question it and disagree with it, or ponder it and see whether it's true for you or not. This is so important in religious pursuit, or spiritual pursuit. So a lot of times, we feel, especially in a religious context, we might feel very intimidated by questioning what an authority figure says, And I guess maybe since the king is asking this, he doesn't have the same level of, he knows the Buddha was supposed to be a king. He's kind of on the same level with the Buddha in a certain sense. They were both kings. So he felt freedom to ask that question. But we should all feel that freedom to question what a teaching is saying, especially if it doesn't quite ring true with our understanding. And that doesn't mean the Dharma is wrong. It doesn't mean that what you understand is wrong. But we can wrestle with this to see how do I make this make sense for me? Is it relevant? Is it helpful? Does it end my suffering and the suffering of others? Because that's really the key question we want to keep in mind, is like, how does this teaching end my suffering or the suffering of others around me? There are many, this is Buddha, there are many kinds of love. We should examine closely the nature of each kind of love. Life has a great need of the presence of love. So, wow, right there. Life has a great need of the presence of love. And actually, I was thinking, my experience, honestly, of Zazen is of love. If I could encapsulate a word for it, a deep sense of love. And that's why I said when we can access the Dharma through Zazen, we're just getting ourselves exposed to just like rays of love, just like the sunlight. It's coming from another space, but we're just allowing ourselves to open to tremendous sense of love. And that's really, for me, I wouldn't continue to do this practice if I didn't experience that. It's really the foundation, I think, of Zazen is love. Because you can't, especially if you're a priest in training and you're living in a monastery with other people, you're going to get your ego checked multiple times in a day. And if you don't have that foundation of love, you don't want to continue. But you don't have to be a priest to experience your ego getting dismantled, right? That happens to us at our workplace, it happens to us in family, and if we're really connected with that sense of love, that sense of I belong, that's my birthright, if we're really connected with that deeply, then we're more pliable mentally. Our heart is more pliable to when we receive feedback unsolicited. Right then, okay, yeah, thank you. And we bow because we know, right? We know. Okay, I'm connected to that source, and that doesn't rely on somebody else telling me something about myself that I didn't really want to know in the first place. So if I can stay, and that's why we come back to Zazen over. I think you guys get this. There's something very attractive to this when we sit in silence in a upright posture and feel that sense of the heart opens and just a sense of, I don't know, it's hard to explain in words, but not the sort of love that is based on, so this is the love that Buddha says, be careful about this kind of love. Lust, passion, attachment, discrimination, and prejudice. So those are kinds of love. Those are kind of skewed. It's a love that's been manipulated. Love is there in all of those. Love is there in lust, passion, attachment, discrimination, and prejudice. There is love there, but it is skewed by the ego. Right? Think about prejudice. Prejudice has great love in it. It's a love that's for a particular group of people, right? Or a particular way of doing things. The love is there. It's just not as open as the love that the Buddha is talking about. Majesty. There is another love sorely needed, which consists of loving kindness and compassion, or maitri and karuna. So loving kindness and compassion. So those are two of the four immeasurables: loving kindness and compassion. So compassion is to love somebody at, recognizing that they're suffering in some way. This is such a hard kind of love to cultivate, because working at a hospital as a chaplain, which I do, sometimes I see family members wanting their loved ones to feel better, and so they'll say things like, "Oh, it's okay, everything's gonna be okay, you'll go to heaven, it's all right," and those are meant to be comforting words. They're meant to be comforting. But who's it comforting for sometimes? It's not necessarily the person who's ill. It's more about themselves wanting not to feel uncomfortable. And we have to keep in mind our practice is not about being comfortable. The more that we can lean into the discomfort of our life, that's the edge. That's the edge of our practice. That's where our growth is. And I'm not saying that we always should be uncomfortable, but it's a good place. That's how we can identify. That's how we can identify the direction to go in. Is where's the discomfort in my life? If you're looking to grow more, you can ask that question as a possible direction. Like, where can I press myself to be just a little bit more uncomfortable? This is a good question for us to ask in our culture that really divinizes comfort over all else. Right? And I'm not against being comfortable, but that's one of the critiques that we received at the when I was training in Japan, and also from my own teacher, is that my teacher would say that the spirit is happy to stay in the hammock as long as it can, and it only gets up when there's some level of there's got to be some agitation in our life, and I think so that's the beautiful thing about here, is that people come here with we come here because we're suffering, and there's some earnestness, and there's a wish to end it, and a knowing that it can be better. So I love working in the spaces. In this space, this is more comfortable for me. Where I find great discomfort is going to my college class of 19-year-olds who are not interested in practice. They're very interested in their cell phones, and it's a real it's a place of growth for me too. So we find our place of growth anywhere we go. And I find myself getting very angry at times. This past semester and the semester before, I was so happy with myself. I told my wife, I said, I didn't get angry in public during the classes the whole semester. That was my goal. Because in the past, I yelled at students for putting out their devices or doing stupid things, and so it was like a big thing. It was like my vow for one semester: do not get angry at any of these students. Just find another way. And the last semester, there was one student that was really grating on me because she would, I'd tell students ahead of time, don't, we're watching this movie, then I'd give them things to do for the video, questions to answer, and inevitably the student would always be, she thought she was being quiet about it, but I could tell, and the energy even, you can tell. So I just quietly went up to her and said, do you mind going outside with that? And she got so pissed off at me, she didn't look at me, she slams her book and walks out the door. Okay, that's on you, not me. But so we can find ways of communicating where we don't lose it. And but I still in my family, with my kids, there's sometimes my wife, we get on each other. Just this morning, my son, he's had a hard time with breathing sometimes, and I have this strong desire for him to just blow your nose. I'm thinking it would help him, but actually, what's happening? It's about me. It's about my discomfort, and I'm recognizing that, and it's grating. But that's where the discomfort is, right? So instead of telling him what to do, maybe I just have to deal with this. This is where my growing edge is. So finding our growing edge. That's compassion, loving kindness, too. Usually, Buddha says, when people speak of love, they are referring only to the love that exists between parents and children, husbands and wives, family members, or the members of one's caste or country. Right? All right, so now this is the Buddha's talking about something very relevant for us as well. This is where we place our love. And it naturally so, right? Husband and wife, family members, your in-group, whatever your in-group is, or your country. We have pride in our country. Because the nature of such love depends on the concepts of me and mine. That's the ego right there. It remains entangled in attachment and discrimination. People want only to love their parents, spouse, children, grandchildren, their own relatives, and countrymen. Because they are caught in attachment, they worry about accidents that could befall their loved ones even before such things actually take place. Right? Think about that. Even before we lose our loved ones, we worry. When such accidents do occur, they suffer terribly. All right. Love that is based on discrimination breeds prejudice. People become indifferent or even hostile to those outside their own circle of love. So this is another way of thinking about love. The circles. I love the circle of love. That's what my teacher's name means. Great circle. Dai-en. Dai means great. My name Daishin means great. Circle is en, like an enso. And she said the meaning of my name is that may I grow my circle of inclusion wider and wider to include everybody. That's the vow or the desire of our practice, of her practice. That was her goal of practice. How can I, that was her koan, how can I grow my circle? How can I really be that Dai-en that is totally inclusive of everybody and everything? And that's a question I think I'd like to pose for each of us too. It's not just for somebody whose name is Dai-en. Dai-en is including all of you in that circle of compassion. How can we also include others beyond? And how do we determine who that other is? Well, who rubs you wrong, right? Dogen, he says, to study the way is to study the self, right? So we start with ourself, and that's the foundation. shikantaza, sitting, just sitting, relaxing with ourselves, loving. That, to relax with ourselves without any distraction is also another way of drawing on love that's there, on drawing on the transmission of awakening of the Buddha. That's the way to receive the Buddha's transmission, is to totally relax and to love ourselves as we are, not based on somebody else's decision who says this is who you are, right? But just as we are at this very moment, this very instant. And that's why we bow to our cushion when we approach it and when we end zazen. It's because we want to acknowledge that deep self-respect, that we are worthy of that love. To study the self is to forget the self. Dogen says to forget the self. All right, so the beginning is the study of the self. Then it's dissolving the self, letting go of the self, right? To become that great nothing. To forget the self is to be one with the myriad beings. So that's opening our level of, that's awakening. To forget the self is to be one with the myriad things. That we are not just the choppy waves on the ocean, but the wave and the ocean are inseparable. We are always, we have the differences, but we are all ocean simultaneously. We're simultaneously individuals and ocean. We're simultaneously wave and ocean. We're simultaneously ourself and the whole universe. Right? To forget the self is to be one with the myriad things, and we experience that when we come here, and we normalize that. It's not we normalize that. This is very important, to normalize that kind of experience, because then you can experience it more and more deeply and feel that love even more and more. To be one with the myriad things is to realize no barrier between self and other. That's our goal. It's a lofty, lofty, lofty goal. And none of us are there yet. None of us are there. And we continue to get tested on. So that's our practice. That's our practice. So the foundation is all right here. And the end goal is also right here too. We begin and end in the same exact space. Same exact space. So that's what I want to share. Thank you all so much for being here.